Okay, Scotch Reels, Screen Education, and the Angel Share. Some of you may already know what the Angel Share is, but I'll come to that at the end. I have two reactions to thinking about Scotch Reels, Scotch Myths, and 1982. One is, it was 27 years ago. It was before, as Murray says, it was before Channel 4. Gus MacDonald, Lord MacDonald of Tradeston, was still editor of World in Action. He was also on the organising committee of Scotch Reels. It was 3 years after the devolution debacle. So in a sense, it was a long time ago, and it was. Media education in Scotland, actually, interestingly, was still very much a hot topic of debate. It was not an established area. So it was a long time ago. My other reaction is, it was only 27 years ago. So on the one hand, it was 27 years ago. On the other hand, it was only 27 years ago. And one of the things that I'm interested in is the extent to which the myth, the thesis that Scotch Reels put forward has persisted. And I came across this quotation. It's actually a quotation that I first found it when I was a PhD student, so it goes back a bit. But just read it. Why then has this thesis held such power? It can be compressed, codified, generalized. It is teachable. It is self-repairing. Where the ritual cannot be found, it has simply evolved out of recognition. It seems to explain everything: origin, form, audience involvement, conflict, variations in content, catharsis. In short, the thesis is brilliant speculative criticism, but it is no more than that. Now, in a sense, that wasn't written about the Scotch Reels thesis. It was written by Richard Schechner, who is a performance theorist in the United States. And it was written about Jane Harrison's and Gilbert Murray's thesis from the 1920s on the ritual origins of Greek drama. But it's a quotation that's actually kind of haunted me. And it's particularly that notion of the teachable. And I think one of the things which we have to recognise about the Scotch Reels thesis is that it was teachable. I mean, it gave a nice kind of model of Tartanry, Kailyard, Clydeside, and that kind of formed a paradigm which was then teachable. It's a bit, actually, James mentioned theories of authorship. Theories of authorship is still in print, and it's still being used, yeah? And it's because it's teachable, yeah? What we have to do is teach students theories of authorship so that they can avoid temptations which they never felt. You know? And I think, in many senses, what the Scotch Reels thesis advanced was a very teachable thesis. And that's been immensely productive. I mean, it was a polemic, so that it started people thinking about Scotch Reels in precisely the way that Murray's talking about it. It started people thinking about it, and it gave a baseline from which we could then think. But, as Murray says, we have moved on. And, I think I take a slightly more, perhaps, Pollyanna-ish view. I may be actually being accused of being too optimistic. Colin MacArthur always says that I'm a revisionist about Scotch Reels. And actually, I think I'm getting to the point where I'm revisionist on the verge of heresy. What I'm interested in is where we are now from the Scotch Reels bit. And starting from Gilles Deleuze, who is now Flavour of the Month in film theory. Gilles Deleuze, in his book on cinema, the second book on cinema, written in 1985, says art, and especially cinematographic art, must take part in this task, not that of addressing a people which is presupposed already there, but of contributing to the invention of a people. And he talks about, we no longer live in the days of Capra and Eisenstein, where they could think of an audience, where they could think of the people. We are now talking about the invention of a people. And he adds, not the myth of a past people, but the storytelling of the people to come. And I think that's in a way where we have come from. I think what Scotch Reels was trying to engage with was the myth of the past people. It was trying to decide how we had been represented. And I think where we're at now is really much more about the storytelling of the people to come. This is put rather more succinctly by Alistair Gray, work as if you were living in the early days of a better nation. Which any of you who inhabit Oran Moor will see inscribed in his murals on the ceiling. So, I think it's, this raises the question of post-devolution, where are we now? And I think one of the things that I kind of pick up on from Alistair Gray is this notion of the as if, yeah, devolution, identity, experiment, as if we were a nation. Duncan Petrie in Screening Scotland talks about a growing sense of cultural self-determination since devolution. And David Martin Jones, writing on Peter Mullen's film Orphans, talks about the recreation of a Scottish national identity after devolution. So there's this idea that after devolution, we can begin to talk about identity in a new way. And I'm a little bit sceptical about it. I mean, it seems to me that what devolution has brought us, I mean, it has brought us many things that we don't particularly like, but the things that it has brought us is a certain sense of experiment. That it seems to me that Scotland has actually been much more experimental since devolution came in. Some of the experiments have failed. I mean, some of them have been embarrassing failures. But nevertheless, there is that sense of trying things out, trying things on. I think that extends to questions of identity. I think we've moved from a gauchiste politics to gauche politics. And I think, in a sense, we're at the point where our political class hasn't yet learned to be proper politicians. And that they're operating to some extent without the safety net of precedent. I mean, I think this is highlighted. Let's not talk about the Daily Telegraph. But, I mean, this is highlighted now. I mean, there is a certain sense in which the Scottish politicians, they may be gauche, they may be awkward, they may get into these silly kind of mistakes. But nevertheless, there is a certain sense of possibility built into devolution. So I mean, my feeling is that what is hopeful about devolution is not the rhetoric of rising and being a nation again, but rather a certain sense of experiment and a conditionality about identity, about working in a state of as if. Yeah? And that ties into somebody who also was associated with the Edinburgh Film Festival and and was certainly in the audience at Scotch Reels, Paul Williman, in an article called The National Revisited. And he makes the distinction between subjectivity and identity. He says subjectivity always exceeds identity, since identity formation consists of trying to pin us to a specific selected subset of the many diverse clusters of discourse we traverse in our lifetimes and that stick to us to varying degrees. So we are kind of given our identities. We are constructed in certain kinds of identities through the kinds of discourses that Murray was illustrating. Some aspects of our subjectivity may be occupied or hijacked by the national identity modes of address, but there are always dimensions within our sense of subjective individuality that escape and exceed any such identity straitjacket. And that seems to me to be where the hopeful element comes in, that we're no longer, I mean, in a sense, we no longer believe we are constructed in quite the way I think that the Scotch Reels thesis kind of proposed we were. We don't feel that kind of Scottishness anymore. And I think there is a much more openness to questions of subjectivity, of shifting subjectivity. And I think in terms of cinema, which is what I'm particularly talking about today, identity is the subject matter of the quality film industry, of the heritage film industry. That's about identities. And I think